The name Aileen Wuornos resonates as a chilling anomaly in the annals of true crime, a female serial killer whose brutal acts ripped through the veneer of societal expectations and left an indelible mark on American consciousness. Her story, a complex tapestry woven with threads of profound trauma, desperation and violence, unfolded primarily along Florida's sun-drenched, yet often desolate, Interstate 75. Between 1989 and 1990, Wuornos, a drifter and prostitute, committed a series of murders that would ultimately lead to her execution, sparking intense debate about justice, victimhood, and the very nature of evil. The motives behind her crimes remained fiercely contested, oscillating between her claims of self-defense against violent clients and the prosecution's insistence on premeditated robbery and murder. Understanding Aileen Wuornos requires delving into a life shaped by abandonment and abuse, culminating in a spree of violence that shocked a nation unaccustomed to such depravity from a woman. Born Aileen Carol Pittman in Rochester, Michigan in 1956, her life began under a shadow of instability. Her mother abandoned her at an early age, and her father was incarcerated, leaving her to be raised by her maternal grandparents. This upbringing, far from providing solace, was characterized by profound challenges and abuse. She endured significant physical and sexual abuse from a young age, experiences that would later be cited as crucial in understanding her psychological makeup. Her early life was a relentless cycle of instability, marked by a teenage pregnancy that resulted in the relinquishment of her child. This trajectory inevitably led her down a path of prostitution and petty crime, a survival mechanism that began in her adolescence and continued into adulthood. Throughout her life, Wuornos exhibited signs of severe mental health struggles, a factor that would become central to her legal defense and public perception. The period between November 1989 and November 1990 marked the peak of her murderous spree. Her first known victim was Richard Mallory, whose body was discovered in Volusia County in November 1989. Wuornos later claimed this killing was an act of self-defense, a narrative she would repeat for subsequent victims. The violence escalated rapidly. David Spears was found dead in Citrus County in June 1990, followed by Charles Cascadden in Pasco County in August 1990. In September 1990, Peter Seams disappeared. His car was later found, though his body was never recovered. That same month, Troy Burress was found in Marion County, and Charles Dick Humphreys, also in Marion County, became another victim. The final confirmed victim, Walter Antonio, was discovered in Dixie County in November 1990. All 7 victims shared striking similarities. They were middle-aged men, typically picked up by Wuornos while hitchhiking or at truck stops along Interstate 75. Each died from multiple gunshot wounds, and evidence of robbery was present in several cases, complicating her self-defense claims. The Florida authorities, faced with a series of seemingly unrelated homicides of men whose vehicles were abandoned, began to connect the dots through ballistics evidence and the locations of the crimes, all pointing to the I-75 corridor. The investigation gradually focused on the prevalence of prostitution activity in these areas. Critical breakthroughs came from tips provided by acquaintances, most notably Tyria Moore, Wuornos's girlfriend. Moore's cooperation with the police, which included wearing a wire, proved instrumental in securing Wuornos's confession. In January 1991, Aileen Wuornos was arrested at a biker bar in Port Orange, Florida. Initially, she confessed to the killings, reiterating her assertion that they were all acts of self-defense against violent sexual assaults. However, the legal proceedings that followed would paint a more complex and often contradictory picture. She was charged with 7 counts of murder, an unprecedented number for a female serial killer in the United States. Her first trial, for the murder of Richard Mallory, began in 1992. The defense presented a compelling argument of self-defense, detailing the horrific abuse Wuornos claimed to have endured at the hands of her victims. Conversely, the prosecution meticulously built a case for premeditation and robbery, showcasing a pattern of behavior inconsistent with pure self-preservation. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. The jury in the Mallory trial ultimately rejected Wuornos' self-defense argument, finding her guilty of first-degree murder. This conviction set a precedent for the subsequent cases. Following the Mallory verdict, Wuornos made a series of strategically motivated guilty pleas for the other murders. This decision was primarily aimed at avoiding further prolonged and emotionally draining trials, though it also cemented her fate. She was ultimately sentenced to death 6 times, a stark reflection of the severity and number of her crimes. Each sentencing further underscored the legal system's interpretation of her actions as premeditated and without justifiable cause, despite her consistent claims. Her story quickly transcended the courtroom, becoming a sensationalized media spectacle. Headlines screamed descriptions like "damsel of death" and "monster," reflecting a public fascination intertwined with moral outrage. The media coverage, often hyperbolic, focused heavily on the rarity of a female serial killer, a phenomenon that challenged conventional perceptions of criminality and gender roles. This intense scrutiny fueled a national debate. Was Aileen Wuornos, a tragic victim of an abusive life, driven to violence out of desperation and self-preservation, or was she a cold-blooded killer who deliberately preyed on men for financial gain? This question significantly impacted public perception, contributing to a complex and often contradictory understanding of female criminality. The legal and ethical debates surrounding her case were profound and multifaceted. At the core of the legal battle was the fundamental conflict between self-defense and premeditation. Wuornos and her defense team consistently argued that her actions were a direct response to violent sexual assaults by her clients, positioning her as a survivor forced to extreme measures. The prosecution, conversely, presented compelling evidence of premeditation, highlighting the consistent pattern of shooting victims multiple times and the subsequent robbery of their possessions, suggesting opportunistic motives rather than pure self-preservation. This unresolved tension remained a critical point of contention throughout her trials and public discourse. Furthermore, questions surrounding her mental state were persistent. Diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder and borderline personality disorder, her competency to stand trial and her overall sanity were frequently debated. These diagnoses painted a picture of an individual with severe psychological disturbances, raising ethical concerns about the culpability of someone with such a history of trauma and mental illness. Her execution reignited the contentious debate about capital punishment, particularly in cases involving individuals with documented histories of profound abuse and psychological disorders. Critics argued that executing someone with such a background constituted cruel and unusual punishment, while proponents maintained that the heinous nature of her crimes warranted the ultimate penalty. Concerns about the fairness of her trials also emerged. Some observers and legal experts argued that her confessions, particularly those made to Tyria Moore under police inducement, might have been coerced. Others pointed to perceived inadequacies in her legal representation at various stages of the proceedings, suggesting that she may not have received the most robust defense possible given the complexities of her case and her psychological vulnerabilities. These issues contributed to a lingering sense of unease for some regarding the justice meted out. Culturally, Aileen Wuornos' story left an indelible mark. The 2003 film Monster, starring Charlize Theron in an Academy Award-winning portrayal, brought her narrative to a wider global audience. The movie deliberately focused on the human tragedy inherent in her life, attempting to explore the psychological complexities and the devastating impact of her abusive past, rather than merely sensationalizing her crimes. This cinematic interpretation sparked further discussion about the societal factors contributing to her actions. Numerous documentaries, particularly those by Nick Broomfield, meticulously explored her life, crimes, and the legal proceedings, offering diverse perspectives and often challenging the mainstream media's portrayal. These films sought to delve deeper into her psyche and the circumstances that shaped her. Feminist interpretations of her case varied widely. Some viewed Wuornos as a tragic figure, a direct product of systemic abuse and societal failures, forced into a violent existence to survive in a deeply misogynistic world. This perspective positioned her actions as a desperate response to pervasive violence against women, particularly those in vulnerable positions. Conversely, other critics challenged this view, emphasizing her personal responsibility for her actions and cautioning against romanticizing or excusing the brutal murders she committed. Her case remains a significant point of interest within the true crime phenomenon, frequently analyzed for its unique aspects, such as the rarity of a female serial killer and the persistent claims of self-defense. Aileen Wuornos spent years on death row in Florida, a period marked by fluctuating mental states. At times, she would vehemently recant her earlier confessions, asserting her innocence and reiterating her claims of self-defense. At other moments, she expressed remorse for the lives taken, while still others saw her display defiance against the system that condemned her. This instability characterized her final years, making it difficult for observers to discern her true sentiments or motivations. Eventually, Wuornos made a pivotal decision. She waived her remaining appeals, stating a clear desire to expedite her execution. She expressed a profound weariness with the legal process and the conditions of her incarceration, indicating a preference for death over continued confinement. Her execution by lethal injection occurred on October 9, 2002. Her final words, delivered moments before the lethal cocktail was administered, were cryptic and somewhat disjointed, further fueling public discussion about her mental state and the justice of her sentence. Her demeanor in those final moments, captured by witnesses, ranged from calm to agitated, leaving an ambiguous impression that lingered long after her passing. This event reignited the national debate surrounding capital punishment, particularly concerning individuals with documented histories of severe trauma and mental illness. Critics questioned the ethics of executing someone whose psychological integrity was so compromised, while proponents maintained that the gravity of her crimes justified the ultimate penalty, irrespective of her personal history. Lingering questions about Aileen Wuornos continue to persist, defying simple answers. The true extent of her psychological damage and its precise role in the commission of her crimes remains a subject of intense speculation and analysis. Was her violence an inevitable consequence of her traumatic upbringing, or did she possess a capacity for malevolence independent of her past? The societal factors that contributed to her downfall are also frequently scrutinized. Her early abandonment, the brutal abuse she endured as a child, and her subsequent descent into prostitution highlight systemic failures that arguably contributed to the trajectory of her life. These elements prompt critical reflection on how society addresses and supports its most vulnerable members. Furthermore, the validity of her self-defense claims in each instance of murder continues to be debated. While the courts largely rejected these claims, the narrative of a woman fighting for her life against violent assailants held a powerful resonance for many. Each victim's death presented a unique set of circumstances, and the uniform conviction for premeditated murder left some questioning if individual nuances were adequately considered. The impact of her story on broader discussions about victimhood, criminality, and justice is undeniable. Wuornos' case forced society to confront uncomfortable truths about gender, violence, and the complexities of human behavior, challenging simplistic notions of good and evil. Her legacy is not merely one of criminality, but also one that compels introspection into the justice system itself. The intense media scrutiny, the ethical quandaries surrounding her mental health and legal representation, and the enduring questions about her true motives have cemented her place in the annals of true crime. Aileen Wuornos became a symbol, not just of a rare female serial killer, but of the profound and often tragic interplay between individual pathology, societal failure, and the pursuit of justice. Her story continues to be analyzed, dissected, and debated, ensuring that the questions she raised about human nature and the societal response to its darkest manifestations remain relevant.